Hello everyone. In this video series, we are going to be digging into a MA4-5 aircraft carburetor, discussing how to gather the information you need before you begin, the actual disassembly, inspections on the carburetor and its components, any repairs that may need to be made, and finally, reassembly. Okay, this is going to be broken up into multiple parts. And I should point out that this video series is intended for my students in their fuel systems class. My students are training to become AMPs. This is for a school setting. So if you have a live aircraft carburetor, an airworthy version, do not use the information that I provide in this video. It may be outdated or may not apply to your aircraft. This is a training model here. This is a non-airworthy version because of defects that may be present inside of it. Okay, this is for training purposes only. All right, let's move past that. So this first section, this first video installment, is going to be covering the basics on the carburetor and how do we obtain the information we need prior to disassembly. Okay, let's take a look at the carburetor itself. This is a Marvel Schebler. That's the manufacturer's name right here, Marvel Schebler, MA4-5. So let's get in on that there. What do I mean by 4-5? See that on that data tag, MA4-5? That is the model designation of this carburetor. Okay, we have a MA4, an MA5, an MA6, an MA3. And it generally refers to the size. So for comparison, here is an MA3. Okay, so you can see the size difference. But we're focusing here on this 4-5. This is an updraft carburetor, which is the most common type of aircraft carburetor you will find. What do I mean by updraft? Well, that means the path the air takes travels up through the bottom of the carburetor and out the top up into the intake system. Okay, so here at the bottom, the air box would be bolted. So air would come through your filter, travel up through the carburetor, and then into the intake runners of the engine. And I'll cut to a clip here in a second of an actual engine with one of these installed so you can see what I'm talking about. Okay, here we are taking a look at a Cessna 150. And I wanted to show you guys a carburetor installed. Now this isn't a 4-5, it's a smaller variant. It looks like it's probably a MA3. In fact, let's check here. Yeah, MA3A. Okay, but it shows the same idea, same principle. If you had a 4-5 on an aircraft engine, you'd have pretty much the same controls, same attachments, etc. Just slightly different size. But in this case, this is a good view of your air filter. You have your filter element here, which would have an opening in the cowling that covers the engine. Air comes in here, takes a right-hand turn, goes up through the carburetor, into your intake, out your intake runners, and into the cylinders. You can see here throttle control for this linkage, and then your mixture control in the back. In this case, it's a variable orifice type. So that's a look at the carburetor mounted on the engine. So we call this an updraft. We also have a downdraft carburetor where it works, but as you can imagine, the opposite way. The carburetor is instead mounted on top of the engine with air traveling down through. Now you can't interchange them. I'm just saying there's different varieties. Everything would have to be flipped around. You can't use this as a downdraft carburetor. This is strictly an updraft. They also have what's called a side draft carburetor, where essentially everything's reconfigured and air travels horizontally instead of up or down. We'll take a look at examples of those here shortly. Okay, to better explain the difference between an updraft, downdraft, and side draft carburetor, I've pulled two vehicles out of my collection to illustrate that. So let's look at this Jeep. It features a downdraft carburetor. So we just got through looking at the MA4-5, which is a standard aircraft updraft carburetor. That means air box sits on the bottom Air comes in the bottom, up through the carburetor where it mixes with fuel, comes out the top of the carb and goes into the intake. This Jeep here is a downdraft. It's the opposite. So the air box, you can see the filter element here, sits on top. Air comes in, goes down through the carburetor where it mixes with fuel, and then goes into your intake runners and into the engine. All right, pretty self-explanatory. Now let's swap over here to this MG, which has side draft carburetors. Okay, we have our air filter element here. So air comes in, goes horizontally through the carburetor and into the intake, into the engine. Now, why am I showing you examples on these vehicles and not on an aircraft? Well, the updraft carb, float carburetor, is by far the most popular when it comes to aircraft. Now we do have side draft carburetors, and I'm sure there's some downdraft carburetors installed, but they're far less common. All right, so you've been given your MA4-5 carburetor. What information do you need prior to disassembling? Well, you need to find the appropriate manual. You can see this one here is our service manual, and it covers a variety of different models. MA4-5, the 4-5AA, MA5, and MA6AA. Again, we've confirmed by looking at this data tag that we have a 4-5 model. So this manual applies. On top of that, we may need to know the engine eligibility of this particular carburetor. So to get that, I also need this number right here below. Okay, the part number, 10-5193. That identifies the specific version of the MA4-5 that this is. What do I mean by that? Well, the 4-5 is going to use the same casting and most of the same parts. But how do you use this carburetor on a multitude of different aircrafts with different requirements? Well, the jet sizing inside, which we're going to look at and explain what that means, the jets, the accelerator pumps, there's certain things within this carburetor that the sizing will vary depending on the application. So not all 4-5s are the same. That's why the part number, in this case 10-5193, is extremely important. All right, once you have your carburetor, we need to find the literature associated with it before we dig in. Okay, we need to know what's expected of us, what tools we need, all that. So over here, I have a service manual. You can see the models this particular book covers, the 4-5, 4-5AA, MA5, and MA6AA. Okay, we've already looked at this, and we have an MA4-5. So this service manual is for us. And you can see inside as a preview of what we're going to get into. This tells you all the specialty tools that you're going to need to do this job, how to properly disassemble it, go through all that, how to clean and inspect the carburetor, and how to reassemble it once you're done, plus how to test it and set certain adjustable devices such as the economizer, the float and needle and seat, how to adjust those, etc. So there's our manual. We're going to come back to that. Okay. We also need to take a look at our engine eligibility chart to make sure that this carburetor is going to be correct for whatever we decide to install it on. You can print this off or view this on Marvel Schebler's website. Again, that's the manufacturer that we see right on the side of the carburetor. If I flip this open, this is going to give me my part number in this column, aircraft model in this column, and the engine it's designed to be applied to in this column. So how does that apply to us, or how can we use this? Well, let's look back at the carburetor. We know it's a 4-5, but you see that number right below the 4-5? 10-5193. Let me get closer, if it'll focus. That is our part number, okay? So we're going to take that 10-5193 and we're going to search this chart until we find it, okay? So I've gone ahead and done that. I'm going to save us some time and flip ahead. and we find it here, 10-5193. Okay, that confirms it's an MA4-5, and more importantly, tells us what exact engines this carburetor was intended to be used on. In this case, an 0360A4M, 0360A1A, or an 0360A4A. Okay, that means you can put this carburetor on one of those engines without modification. Okay, and again, if I haven't mentioned why this is important, you can have a dozen MA4-5 carburetors, but if they have different part numbers, then they likely have different jet sizes, different settings, all of that going on internally that make them either suitable or not suitable for the aircraft you're trying to put them on. So knowing the part number and following the manufacturer here will tell you what this is set up to work on the way it should. Okay, so you need to document what engines this, or your carburetor in your case, is intended to be used on. Okay, there's one other document we're going to look at here in this binder. Whoops. I have these laminated sheets, and they are going to give you the part numbers to repair this carburetor if you find any issues. They give you this exploded diagram on the back, and every part is numbered. So let's say I needed this gasket. That's number 20. Flip it over, look at my reference number here, come down to number 20. There's the part number I need to look up, how many the carburetor needs, a description of it that matches. It's the gasket for the throttle body to the bowl. So I can use this sheet to order replacement parts. It also has some other important information for us. Okay, it confirms up here that this was intended for a Lycoming engine, and need to verify that our part number is correct, A105193. The A10 is a prefix. The model is correct, MA4-5. And then here's this other critical info. Your float setting, economizer setting, both of those we're going to need when we reassemble the carb later. So take note of this. Okay, doesn't make sense now, but it will once we start reassembling. Okay, so as a recap, you need to locate the proper service manual using the model type that you have. We have a 4-5. That's our service manual. We need to look up the engine eligibility using the part number, which is found right below the model number. Okay, that tells us, like we showed, what engine specifically that was intended for. Then finally, you need your parts diagram, which is going to give you references to all the parts that should be within this carburetor, their quantities, and the number, so you can reorder, plus, whoops, float and economizer setting information here at the top. Okay, now let's cover ADs and SBs. We'll start with ADs. Right now, I'm on the FAA website using their dynamic regulatory system to search for my ADs. I can come down here to their filter guide and kind of narrow down my search area to save me a bunch of time. We'll start with the top left. I want current because I want to see active ADs. Under product type, I can select appliance. Okay, it's not an aircraft, an engine, or a prop, so that'll greatly narrow it down. Then I can come over here to subject and type in carburetor and select that as a subject for my search. And then I can even choose, make up here. You have to be careful though. It's easy to over filter when searching for ADs. And here's an example. We've been talking about the carburetor we're working on as being a Marvel Schebler make carburetor, right? That's who makes it. Well, Marvel Schebler was bought out by Precision Airmotive a number of years ago. If you look here at our search for make, we have Marvel Schebler, we have Marvel Schebler Products Division, and we have Precision Airmotive Corporation. Okay, that's three different options, three different manufacturers who all made our carburetor. Now, I'm not even sure the difference between Marvel Schebler and Marvel Schebler Products Division. It's easy enough to tell if it's a precision air motive carb because they'll put their name on it instead of Marvel Schebler if it was made recently enough. But to be safe, I'm not going to narrow it down that much because I'm afraid I might rule out some ADs that apply to me. Okay, I'm not that confident in it. So if I do that and apply, when I scroll down, here are all the ADs that meet the basic criteria I inputted. I can quickly eliminate most of them by looking at what they apply to. I'll see ones for an MA3, ones for an HA6 carb. Okay? But I want to be careful when I go through this. I don't want to miss anything that's relevant. You guys learn about ADs in other classes. This is what you need to accomplish for mine. Get on here, narrow this list down, excuse me, and compile a list of those that apply to your specific carburetor. So when we do disassemble it, at that time, we can try to comply with those ADs or confirm that they have been complied with. Okay? Now, SBs. SB stands for Service Bulletins. To get that, all we have to do is to go to the manufacturer's website. And in this case, Marvel Schebler, if I go to product support, they have the ability to select service bulletins, which takes you to this page here. If I scroll down, it shows all of their active service bulletins. I can go through this list just like I did with the ADs and select the ones that may apply to my carburetor. Now, SPs aren't required to be complied with, but oftentimes they will turn into an AD, so it's always a good idea to comply with them if possible to save you headaches in the future. Okay? If you have a newer carburetor built by Precision Air Motive, you can find the SBs on their website the same way, and there's their list. Okay, so once you have your manual chosen, your engine eligibility, and you've searched for ADs and SBs, then you're ready to begin disassembly. You see I'm wearing gloves. Avgas, which this carburetor would be running, is typically leaded, or the most popular variant is 100 low lead, which does contain lead and other harmful chemicals to your body. You don't want to handle it. It's okay once or twice, but prolonged exposure or repeated exposure can lead to some serious health conditions. So we need to preserve ourselves there. So I'm wearing gloves because even if you drain this out, there's still traces or dried remains of that fuel. You're still going to get it on you. I need to have safety glasses on. Okay, I'm going to be cutting safety wire. I don't want a piece of stainless wire shooting off into my eye. Would not be good. And I may require other PPE past that during certain steps of this, but we'll cover those as they come along. The main thing is make sure your workstation is clean and that you stay clean by wearing gloves, eyeglasses, hearing protection as needed, and so on. Now, something else I need to think about is how I'm going to organize and store the parts I remove from this carburetor. Okay? It may not look like much now, but you have a ton of different pieces inside this carburetor. Let me remind you with this part sheet. Okay? See every number here, every piece in this exploded diagram? That's what you have to keep track of when you disassemble this. Now, you may think while you're taking it apart, this is easy to remember, but come back a week later, say once you wait on a new gasket to come in and you're ready to put it together now, you may find that you've forgotten. So it really helps to get an organizer of some sort that you can label the compartments in the order that you remove everything. So when you go to put it back together, you know exactly what goes where. Okay, so an organizer or some other form of organization is key. All right, let's grab our tools.